Hello everyone and welcome to your horoscope for the week of November the 20th till 26th, 2023. The intensity of this larger astrological period of course continues next week, but this is where we also have two very important energy shifts that are gonna take place almost simultaneously, very quickly, one after the other. And this is where we are talking about the sun, after which Mars, leaving the sign of Scorpio and entering into the sign of Sagittarius, which will definitely set a totally different tone. Yet, even though, as I said, the tone is different, the intensity is still ongoing. Why? Well, first of all, at the beginning of the week, we still have both Mars and the sun conjunct by the degree, so very, very close, dancing very, very close to one another in the sky in the sign of Scorpio. But of course, we are used to this. Yet, right now, they're at the very end degrees of the sign of Scorpio. At the beginning of the week on Monday, on 27 degrees of Scorpio. And as they start making their way to the 29th degree, that's what astrologers call an erratic degree, and any planet there or any astrological point has its symbolism greatly amplified, so it's able to bring forward its more extreme qualities, and it's usually karmic, fated, its shadow expression. The threads of fate and karma do favor when planets or anything are, in these very, very end degrees of any sign. But this is just one side of the picture. The other side, that both Mars and the Sun are two energies, two planets in astrology, which are fiery. Whenever they meet another planet or another point or something important in a chart, they combust it, they energize it, they make it in a way, on one hand, that much more important, visible, impactful, and it usually becomes combustive, explosive. It manifests one way or another. But this time around, it's actually each other. So the fact that they're combusting, they're igniting, they're feeding each other's flames, symbolically, of course, makes this energy very, very intense, both in the scorpionic segment, and I would like to say especially in the Scorpio, because it is Mars's ancient ruling sign, and Mars is especially, um, let's say, result or action oriented in this part of the sky, and also very, very intense. As I said in previous horoscopes, it will really, really not care what it has to do to get where it needs to get what it wants, to satisfy its needs. So we see this play out in the world stage so very clearly that there is no stopping a certain course of action which was fixed, Scorpio fixed sign. But of course, in the sign of Sagittarius, even though the energy is different, it still has an intensity of its own. On one hand, because Sagittarius is a mutable fire sign, so it is very, very, combustive in its nature, but in a very mutable way. Whenever it is needed or whenever it is sparked, whenever it is in the highlight. But of course, there is another element here which makes this energy that much more intense and also complex. As soon as either the Sun or Mars enter the sign of Sagittarius, they will immediately hold a conversation of tension, a square, with Saturn from fellow mutable sign Pisces. So this is an energy where certain blockages, certain limitations, or something that basically stops or challenges or freezes in place the Sagittarian initiative, you know what I mean? We are going to be feeling. This can be like a strong reality check in certain ways, a reality check legally speaking, because Sagittarius rules anything that has to do with justice, law, the evolution of law, the philosophy of law, the principles of law. So we will definitely see this play out on the world stage in a very obvious way. But at the same time, Sagittarius is long distance travel. For example, travel by a plane. We might see blockages, or we might see some inconveniences play, or actually restrictions play out in that way, because Saturn is also the principle of restriction, where Sagittarius is more of the principle of freedom. So when these two square one another, there is going to be tension for freedom, because there is a restriction coming from somewhere, Saturn, and there is also going to be a fight for freedom coming from another place, Mars in Sagittarius. But perhaps the energy that is more likely to or at least this will without a doubt play out one way or another, is that both Sagittarius and Pisces are two signs which have a lot to do with religion, with faith, from a different perspective, in a different way, but both of these do speak about these elements. So you can imagine that religious conflict, religious debate, religious, contradiction is definitely going to be part of the picture. And we already see this play out on the world stage in a very obvious, in a very clear way. But after this being said, I invite you to look at my screen and let's go together in the energies of next week. So we see here we are in the 20th of November, where this Mars and Sun conjunction is ongoing. They are conjunct to the degree. The Sun is starting to pick up more speed and leave Mars behind. But at this moment, in the 20th of November, we still see them together. And it is not just them together, but there is another planetoid here, and we're speaking about Ceres. So this is actually a triple conjunction: Mars, Sun, and Ceres. Now, Ceres has a lot to do with nurture, with grain. Sometimes, very many times actually, she represents like a physical source of food, or for example, diet. But, in the sign of Scorpio, fixed water, anything that really feeds our psyche. Now, without a doubt, for very many people, this triple conjunction can also play out as something within their diet. Because Scorpio rules physical, like substances, toxins, everything that we need to eliminate from our system, from our body. But in a different way, in a higher octave, it can also rule substances which act like medicine, or which do something medicinal to the body. So for a lot of people, this will be the realization that they need to follow a diet, they need to detox. While in another expression, because this triple conjunction holds quite a tight sextile with Pluto. A sextile is a celestial conversation which is harmonious, but it needs to be used. It needs to be activated by us, either through an initiative, an action, or follow an impulse, follow something. So it usually needs either action or sometimes inaction, when action would be the norm. You know what I mean? So apply the wisdom, and that's how we activate the sextile. So this sextile, especially because Pluto is the ruling planet of Scorpio, the modern ruler, and Mars is the ancient ruler. So a harmonious conversation between the two rulers is a big deal, because it represents empowerment. There is potential, there is power, there is strength, some kind of strength there. And we need to figure out what it is and how to use it. And figuring it out is not all that difficult, especially because the sun always is the luminary. So it sheds light on something. Mars together with the sun, we can, whatever is being revealed, or it comes from our inner light, epiphany, or whatever, or some kind of result of our research, investigation, digging deep, Scorpio. So that can be used very, very efficiently and quickly, and it can get us a very long way. It can really be a momentum. It can really be the path towards a breakthrough, or to achieve something, or to get something. But we really, really need to use our empowerment, our own personal power, and also the wisdom, the information, and everything that is being bestowed upon us as we speak, because this is a more instant energy. What it is that we need to do, and where, the treasure, the alchemical treasure, Scorpio, lies, becomes, obvious as we go along. So this is a really, really positive aspect, one of my favorite aspects, because it gives us a choice to use our power and get a long way with this. Now, this sextile can be used in any way, shape, and form. So, going back to series, a detox, to ambition yourself, to determine yourself, to eliminate something from your life that has been hindering you for a long time. This is also very persuasive energy, when we can convince other people to, do whatever, to help us, or to do this or that. So this is a strong persuasion. This is where we can also use our magnetism to attract what we need in our life, to attract solution, or a psychological intensity, focusing on something very, very intensely, and it comes to us, or somehow that intensity leads us to get what we want ultimately. And this energy also has a different kind of, how should I say, like a completion to it, even though these following planets don't converse directly. We have a sextile between Mercury and Venus, and this sextile between these two planets are going to stay with us all throughout the week, because as both of these planets advance further in the signs they're in the present moment, Venus in Libra, very strong there, very powerful. She rules this part of the sky. And Mercury in Sagittarius, Mercury doesn't like it all that much in Sagittarius, because it is imprisoned. Sagittarius is the opposite sign of the sign that rules Gemini, so it is in exile. Yet the sextile does represent the power of persuasion, loving words, convincing words, achieving stuff, through negotiation, through words, through communication, through the share of information. Venus in Libra makes sure of the loving part, the equilibrious part, equitable part. So this is a really, really beautiful energy. And later on in the week, when they will reach around 20, 21 degrees of their signs, they will hold a quincunx. Two quincunxes actually, from Venus, one from Mercury, with Uranus. So surprise, surprise. That is definitely a surprise moment. So we don't know exactly where using this diplomatic skill, or speaking about what it is that our ideas, our imagination, our highest principles, Sagittarius, how we feel about the law and legislation, for example, or anything that has to do with our philosophy, with our worldview, principles, matters of faith, even religion. We don't know where that can potentially take us, and we'll find out later on in the week, when, as I said, there is a yacht formation, a finger of God pointing at Uranus again. Surprise, surprise. But that surprise can be economic, financial, Taurus. It can be something that has to do with our basic needs, again, Taurus. And it can also have something to do with Earth. And this is where either Earth movements, unusual weather, or Earth phenomenon, and the impact that they leave. Again, Uranus in the sign of Taurus. And they can also have to do with value, like an earthquake or something erupting, something chaotic regarding values. So that can also mean money and banking and finances and stuff like that, especially legally speaking, because again, both Sagittarius and Libra are the two signs which rule the law and the course of justice. So without a shadow of a doubt, there are going to be big moves in courts of justice, at least internationally speaking. But that can also represent individually, especially if this applies to you. There can be big evolution, big moments, but also, as I said, surprises. Oh, and also all these three planets, so keep in mind that Ceres is also here, still hold a trine, so a conversation of supreme harmony with Neptune. Neptune being at around 24 degrees of the sign of Pisces, here Neptune is. So again, of course, this means blessing. This means our intuition. This means our inner knowledge. This means the gut feeling, the instinct is helping us very much, much more perhaps than our mental sphere, our, external perceptions. There is a lot of inner wisdom and the intelligence of the spirit working very strongly within us to guide us somewhere, to lead us somewhere, or to help us get what we want. This also represents the power of spirituality, the power of prayer. Again, in a non-religious way. Why? Because the religious way is going to be heavily debated this week, due to when the Sun and Mars enter into Sagittarius, they will immediately hold a square with Saturn. So ritualism, tradition, truth based on sacred texts, holy books, passed down on generation, tradition again, is not gonna be heavily debated, let's say. So that means even from within ourselves, we are gonna have certain doubts, doubting all of the tradition, everything that was just passed down on us, everything that was just written. However, on the opposite way, our innate connection to the divine, our way of communicating with the divine, the way we interpret everything internally speaking, that is going to be extremely powerful. Needless to say, a really good energy for healers, artists, spiritualists, psychologists, and any activity that has to do with all of this. And the power of the spirit, the occult, the paranormal, call it however you want, is going to be very ongoing. While on the other hand, in the second part of the week, when both the Sun and Mars are in Sagittarius, that's when the power of the cosmic is going to be very emphasized. Now let's move on. My notes, yeah, on my notes say the 22nd, and this is important because you can't see it yet on my screen, but there we go. The Sun entered into the sign of Sagittarius. So with this, I would like to wish a very happy birthday month, birthday period for all Sagittarius natives. And immediately it holds a square with Saturn. So if we just take the Sun squaring Saturn, well, that is always a reality check. The Sun is the light of our consciousness, the luminary. We are looking at everything, basically, whatever is visible, whatever the Sun sheds light on. And we're also looking at the Saturn limitations, our limitations, and in the sign of Pisces, certain limitations that come from the a long distance past. For example, that which we inherited from our family or from our culture, from the ancestors, let's say. So these kind of limitations regarding spirituality, faith. This is where, again, Saturn is organized spirituality. Well, it is more like religion, let's say. So everything that is not okay in that theme, in that topic, of course, on the world stage, I'm not even gonna mention that because it's so obvious. How is it already playing out? You know, but individually, this is where we're starting to have certain doubts. Not really about faith itself, but about certain solid Saturn elements of it. And solid is ultimately ritualism. Like if that ritualistic element is actually the key to the power or key to the spirit or key to whatever is in how, let me just give you like proper examples. Me doing something spiritual or magical or esoteric at a certain time, at a certain period, when the text, when the grimoire, when whatever tells me, in which degree is that actually real? In, to me personally, in which degree am I part of that ritual? Because when we see the limitation here, our mind gets freer in, because this is the highest and the positive, most positive expression of the square, the challenge. It frees the mind. So what if the solid element of the ritual is not real to me? Where does this new liberty lead me to? But at the same time, it can represent, you know, like crystals for Saturn is always solid. Crystals, the candle, the mojo, the gree, whatever talisman or object or solid. When I say solid, it's even our own ritualism. I have to do it at 6 o'clock. I have to do it in this way. I have to wear white. You know, everything like that is Saturn. So these elements are gonna find themselves being challenged by the light of our consciousness. Because if we live in the cosmic, if we live in a very Sagittarian way, if we view the world in a very Sagittarian way, the higher octave, of course, then we see that even though the ritualistic elements have a good sense of logic why they exist and why they are needed at a certain stage and point, we can overcome them. We can see beyond them. We can embrace what lies beyond whatever they open, because they're like keys opening us to certain frequencies. So, you know, even though this is like a reality check, it can have so many good sides to it. Now, from a not so favorable expression, that Saturn in Pisces is over, as I said, psychological limitation. I'm not good enough. The past showed me that. Dot, dot, dot. You know what I mean? So everything that we store in our unconscious and also our disharmonious way of being can also represent this limitation, where we simply cannot pull ourselves together because we allowed excessive chaos inside our inner beings. And Pisces is mutable. Pisces is both sides of the spectrum. So chaos is hand in hand with Pisces if it's unbound. This is one way how this reality check can play out. I cannot heal, and also the healing part. Saturn holds a semi-square with Chiron. So the wounds and the wounding is also deeply emphasized this week. The wound that we cannot shift, the wound that we cannot close, the wound that even, let's say it closed, but the scar is bothering us so much. The wound which memory reverberates in our soul and we cannot shift out of it. So there is going to be that side as well. and the sun squaring Saturn is definitely a reminder. After the sun comes Mars. Oh, before I get to Mars squaring Saturn, I would like to also highlight that on the 22nd, we have Venus, again in her home sign of Libra, everything that has to do with, the love of equality, the love of justice, the love of fairness, the love of actually Venus in Libra is quite philosophical herself, the love of pure thought, the love of, a very realized, a very earthly type of compassion. Pisces is the feeling of compassion, compassion in philosophy, and compassion in deep heart. Venus in the sign of Libra is compassion realized, compassion given a shape and form, the action, the gesture that we do in the name of compassion. So she holds an opposition with Chiron and Aries. Again, the wound. How do we feel about the wound and the wounding? In which manner is it fair, unfair? Now, how this will play out on the world stage, this is so obvious. Venus in Libra, international human rights, international courts of justice, everything about the protection of life, the protection of the human element, the protection of innocent, the protection of children, victims of war. This is obvious. Standing across the sky from Chiron in Aries, Aries the sign of the warrior, the victims of war. So there is going to be strong debate and even some kind of action to help the situation in this sense. But we must not forget Saturn in Pisces, again, the sign of compassion, sign of solidarity. All are one. Their wounds are mine wounds, for example. But also the limitations, squaring Sun and Mars, meaning that, okay, there is the need to help, but how am I going to heal it? How am I going to help the process of healing? First, we have to overcome the limitations. You know what I mean? Everything that makes us alien, foreigner, or the enemy of one another. That is a very raw and brutal interpretation of Saturn in Pisces. And we must not forget that Saturn himself went direct not so long ago, and it's still not very quick. It's only moving a few minutes, and it's still in its shadow path. So, of course, it evokes everything from the past. All of the non-resolved, old, very old issues from the past, because that is Pisces, the long-term past. Pisces can go back to hundreds of years. And if there is pain there, if there is injustice there, if there is some kind of empathic echo buried in the midst of time, that Pisces brings it to the surface. Saturn in Pisces, because Pisces is the sign of finalities. It needs to complete this. It needs to put some kind of resolution or end to this. Or in the worst case scenario, sweep it back under the rug for the next Saturn cycle. But let's hope that, at least individually speaking, we heal old issues from stemming from here. So let's move on to the 23rd. This is where we have the perfection of Mercury. Actually, it's not a perfection. This is when both Mercury and Venus are starting to hold their quincunxes with Uranus. So none of these aspects is perfected. It is just the beginning, but still it's a yod. Is the finger of God pointing at Uranus? Again, earth events, political, social, especially economic instability, chaos. But when I say chaos, let's not just think about the doom and gloom. It can be like a big, like a roller coaster. It can also have highs. It can also have unexpected opportunities that come out of the blue. So I'm not just speaking about doom and gloom here. It can play out in both ways. And also everything that has to do with our sense of value, sense of worth, and everything that has to do with technology and certain truth that needs to come out, especially Mercury quincunx, Mercury quincunx Uranus, truth, news, international news, news about the law, Mercury and Sagittarius. So, but this is a quincunx. So I'm not saying that it's the raw truth. We have to process it because chances are whatever is being dished out, especially from media, social media, mainstream media, any kind of media, reporters, or anything, it is highly, highly, highly subjective, if not manipulative. So we have to filter it. You know what I mean? So maybe that is exactly the yod, the finger of God, how we filter it, how we make sense of it, what it means to us personally, because we also need to take into consideration common sense, Venus in Libra, legal common sense, you know? I don't even know how to explain this in a greater detail. All of us know what basic, what primordial law and justice means. You know what I mean? And so justice and law have to make sense. They do need to base themselves on some kind of common sense. That common sense may not really be found in nature because we are human beings. The humans, it is only found in the human spirit, but common sense is still common sense. And then Mercury in Sagittarius, how is it applied? Moving on the 24th, this is where we have Mars entering into the sign of Sagittarius. Now, Mars is pretty well off, let me explain it like that, in the sign of Sagittarius because it is a fire sign. It is a quick fire sign. So it allows Mars's qualities to come forward. But again, on one hand, it is still conjunct the sun, even in Sagittarius. So there is combustion, there is extra quickness. There is where things move on very, very quickly, but perhaps not at the beginning, because both of these planets, as I say, hold the square to Saturn. So that stops, or at least has a very strong attempt to stop this quick energy in its tracks, because it has to divert its focus onto the limitations. But Mars and Saturn together, especially in ancient times, were considered the malefic. Saturn, the great malefic, Mars, the lesser malefic. So whenever they speak in square, that can mean strife, conflict, military action, aggression, and all of that. And why? Religion or certain kind of laws stemming from the past. So something from the past is definitely going to be fought for, debated, and it's going to cause a lot of inconveniences. It's going to cause a lot of, problems. And going back to the quincunx with Uranus, that can also represent, due to this aspect, limitations. It can represent in the sense that cutting the freedom of speech, social media, the internet. So this can represent big, big interdictions to speak your mind or to have certain opinions about certain things. So this can play out quite in an intense and not so favorable way. But personally speaking, of course, it has positive sides to it. As where does our reality check, a strong reality check in our life, lead us to? Refining our methodology, refining our plans, refining our resources, and taking an alternative course of action. not necessarily what we planned, especially when Mars was in the sign of Scorpio. Something that still keeps the essence, but maybe it finds a detour due to this reality check. So individually, this can be quite, it's uncomfortable, don't get me wrong. Psychologically is when we, how, I don't want to say lose our hopes, not at all, but our hopes become much more grounded. The fantasy is taken away from the hope, and only the applicable part is what remains. So this energy, I'm not gonna lie, it can play out like, for example, in tarot, the Five of Cups. A bit of disappointment, a bit of heaviness, a bit of, oh, I was so enthusiastic about this, I was so passionate about this, and look, the limitation, or look, the old problem got in my way. But absolutely, but don't allow this to bitter you or to cut down your enthusiasm, because on one hand, the square doesn't last for a very long time. And the other thing, take into consideration all the wisdom that the square, the limitation actually show you, and find ways to overcome them, or find alternative ways to come. Sagittarius loves alternative. So that is the good side to it. And the Sun and Mars are not alone, they're together. So they're extra powerful. So they can find ways to overcome Saturn's limitation, or actually find some solutions to it. Let's move on to the 25th, when I'll show you Ceres. Remember, she was part of the triple conjunction, also moved into the sign of Sagittarius. And of course, she is conjunct Mars and the Sun once more in Sagittarius. So again, Ceres is, and naturally, she squares Saturn. Ceres squaring Saturn may mean a shortage of food. It may mean shortage of anything that nurtures us. And Ceres squaring Sagittarius, remember, Ceres squaring Saturn in Sagittarius also emphasizes the fact that either communication, truth, opinion, the media, or sharing information, it can be cut out, either as an interdiction or some kind of disruption, because Ceres in Sagittarius, what feeds justice and law? Previous cases, how legal cases are solved in courts of justice. Well, that becomes an integral part of legislation. You know what I mean? So we can also see that play out on the world stage, and at the same time, a humanitarian crisis because of food or basic needs, anything that nurtures. Because it's not just the gut that needs nurture. We need so very many resources for our everyday lives that can also be a representation of Ceres. Anything that basically helps us live, nurtures us. Now, of course, we can get into the specifics. This Ceres in Sagittarius, international export, especially grains, cereals, and sometimes fuel. This is also going to be debated, but this is also going to be debated in every culture's parliament. So issues around food, the ethical element of food, that which is genetically modified, etc., etc. So these are going to be debated in parliament and stuff like that. And on the around the 25th, we can see on one hand the moon will conjunct Jupiter. The moon is our collective feeling. Again, Jupiter is the planet of truth and justice. We will feel very strongly about something, about legal issues, but Taurus can be our basic needs, around basic needs, basic rights, human rights, food, anything like that. And this is where the quincunx and also the sextile, so the sextile between Venus and Mercury, and them holding a quincunx with Uranus, so the finger of God pointing at Uranus. Here we go, it's much more visible here. So the finger of God pointing at, where are you, Uranus? Here we go. So this is one quincunx, the other quincunx pointing at Uranus. So again, surprise moment. But the sextile between Mercury and Venus is still ongoing. So again, the power of persuasion, power of self-expression, fighting for justice in courts of justice, for example, more individually speaking, and loving words, flattery even. Where do they get us? And whenever Mercury and Venus sextile one another, that's really good for love, romantic declaration, romance. Venus is in the part of the sky where all of that is part of her repertoire, especially in a very platonic way. And finally, moving on to the 26th, this is where we have the moon conjunct Uranus. Again, something about our collective feelings, something awakens us, something shocks us. We react emotionally to something, and that's something, keep in mind that the quincunx that Venus and Mercury hold with Uranus is still a bit active. So this is probably when we get the surprise factor, when the fated communication, the fated news, the fated something that happens in courts of justice affects us materially, because the moon and Uranus conjunction in Taurus. So that will be very probable. And also, speaking about the moon, this is where the moon is setting up the stage to hold the Gemini full moon a day after, but that will be the subject of next week's horoscope. And I might have a separate video, speaking about the full moon in the sign of Gemini, which is also going to be very, awakening, so to speak. So, in conclusion, the intensity will continue, just it will take the Sagittarian expression, which in a way, as I said, Sagittarius has its very own moments and expressions of, power burst, of quickness. Sagittarius is one of the quickest signs out there, and it aims very high. So you can imagine it has its own fiery nature, its own intensity, because ultimately that's where. But the positive side to this is, now Scorpio is, as I said in so very many previous videos, the sign which holds a certain kind of toxin to it. Toxin is power. Toxin is distilled essence of power. Sagittarius, the archer, basically aims its arrow at the heart of the scorpion, because that toxin needs to be used for the greater good. Sagittarius makes sure that Scorpio uses its wisdom, because Scorpio is the research, the knowledge, us getting there for the greater good. So this is why this gives me a lot of hope, because in Sagittarius, whatever the Sun and Mars, in this case Ceres as well, have done in Scorpio, now we can use it to the greatest good, especially individually speaking, and whatever we do individually reverberates collectively. So we can use loving wisdom, we can use our faith, our worldview, our own cosmic empowerment to really make important changes, not just in our individual lives, but on the world, collectively speaking. So thank you, everyone. I really hope that this was useful. Thank you for all the love, all the help that anyone really helped me last week. Thank you so, so, so much. If you'd like to support my work, please like and share. You can donate in the PayPal link in the description below. Thank you, everyone. Until next time, bye for now.